I felt myself lifting away, and I could actually look down and see Roger performing, resuscitating me. And then I'm back in my body. And he said I was down for about 8 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes, don't know for sure.
Welcome to the Veteran-Led Podcast, where we talk with leaders who use their military experiences to develop great organizations and continue to serve their communities. Today's episode, we have former Navy SEAL and Vietnam veteran Craig Marley. As a member of SEAL Team 1, he was assigned to Mac V SOG in Da Nang, where he trained South Vietnamese Sea Commandos in clandestine missions into North Vietnam. His underwater adventures have taken him into some of the deepest and most hostile parts of the ocean. Over the next 25 years, he authored numerous award-winning technical papers, several novels, and helped several laser startup companies grow to multi-million-dollar enterprises.
I was born in Canada. My parents are Canadian. And after the war was over, my dad couldn't get a job. There was no work after the war was over. I was born in 43 and the war ended in 45. And so my mother had two brothers that had migrated to California. And that was they helped my mom and dad get all the paperwork together and get a sponsor at that time. But they grew up in the Depression era, so they were that kind of mentality of people that were born. My dad was born in 1916. My mom was born in 1920. My mom had a real affinity for the water. She loved the water. My dad used to take her on canoe trips up the river in Winnipeg, and we emigrated to California when I was 3 years old. And my mom decided she wanted to be a Red Cross water instructor. In those days, the Red Cross gave a certifiable course in swimming instruction. And she wanted to treat people because she saw many times in Winnipeg, kids getting thrown in the water by their uncle or their dad or a drunk neighbor or whatever and drowning. And she felt that a lot of people that had survived that event really needed some professional training to get over the obstacle of the fear of drowning because they'd already experienced that. And she had me tag along as a 5-year-old. And I was the guy that had to go down to the bottom of the pool and pick up an object. And then she would use that to taunt the students and say, if a 5-year-old can do it, so can you. And so I was helping her in that small way. And we became obviously very close. After we moved to California, I got involved in competitive swimming at the local YMCA. And I did pretty well in the age group stuff. This is the 8, 9, 10-year-old, 11-year-old. But my coach, a gentleman by the name of Fred Wejack at the San Jose Y, he said, Craig, you're never going to be able to get the kind of training that here at the Y. First of all, the pool was a 20-meter pool, and all the competitions done in 25 yards or 50 meters, one of the two, depending on whether you're in a short course or long course. So he asked if I would be interested in going away to Santa Clara Swim Club and interviewing with the coach, George Haynes. George was a wonderful coach, and over his career, he was Olympic coach several times for both men and women. So he coached, I believe, over 50 Olympians. And so it was much of an honor for me to be able to go to interview with him. My parents didn't have any money. We grew up in a modest income family, but George let that by. He did not pursue that at all, and he let me join the team after a few laps of swimming and time trials. Felt that I had some promising future in swimming. So I worked real hard in the pool. We worked sometimes 2-3 hours a day, sometimes twice a day, 6 days a week. And as I grew up, my times got better. I was typically winning more races and competing at a very high level. That's the story of my swimming career. I held the national high school record momentarily for the 100-yard breaststroke, and I was very good in water polo as well.
And in reading the book, I'm getting through it, and I'm getting to that part. And I'm like, oh, this guy's going to go on to be a college swimmer and an Olympic athlete, and that didn't happen. What happened, Craig?
Well, what happened was I fell in lust. I guess that's a word for it. One of the gals that was swimming with me, a couple of years older, well, she wasn't, about a year older than me, and we just got together in the locker room one night, and that's how it happened. She got pregnant, and I got married the day after I turned 17 years old. It broke
So
my
you're
mother's
married
heart.
with a kid in high school.
Married with a kid in high school, and I came back to high school my senior year. And don't forget, this is in the 1960s, so the mentality of administration was a little bit different. And basically, they told me that they weren't going to allow a married man to attend high school with all these other young girls there. So they kicked me out. And even though had been elected class president, they kicked me out of high school. So I went to work and did what a responsible father should do. And it wasn't working out. It was clear it wasn't working out. So we separated and we divorced, and we have a daughter, and she lives with her mother in St. Louis, and the mother became a very successful dentist. And I'm proud that we have a daughter together, and she has 3 great kids. So I have 3 great grandchildren from her. No hard feelings, but it broke my mother's heart. It broke my mother's heart. She had invested so much in me, and I felt like I really let her down. And I felt like I had to regain some respect for myself and also for my family. And so that's when I decided to join the Navy. It's ironic that I really didn't have any plans once I got in the Navy. I just thought that would be a great place to restart my life. And while I was in boot camp, some gentlemen from the underwater demolition team, which, as you know, is a pre-qualifying or precursor to SEALs. At the time, nobody knew anything about SEAL team. They had just been commissioned in January of '62, and I went through boot camp in April of '62. And while I was there, some instructors from UDT, underwater demolition team, came into the auditorium and they gave a presentation and showed the movie with Richard Widmark, blowing up explosives in the water and stuff like that. So there was about 200 of us young recruits in that group that decided to check this out. It must be something fun to be a Navy frogman. And so I filled out the form, and next day I had to report for an interview. And the guy that interviewed me was a guy named Jerry Harmon. He was a second class bosun mate in UDT 11, and he interviewed me with typical questions, And then the final one was, "What makes you think you can get through this program?" And I took a cocky attitude and I said, "I think I'm faster than anybody you have ever seen in the water." And he called me a cocky rascal. And he said, "Okay, report to the pool tomorrow." So I went to the pool the next day, and there was 8 guys chosen from that group. And I lapped everybody in the pool. And I could do enough push-ups and enough chin-ups to satisfy the basic requirements. My problem was I'm a fairly heavy boned man, and I was a really terrible runner. I mean, I was always in the goon squad when it came to running. And in one event, they tied a rope around my waist and dragged me down the beach behind a Jeep. I was so slow. So get me in the water, coach, and I'll show you how to swim. And that's how I got in. And of the 8 guys that took the swimming test, only 2 of us were selected to join the class. And the class had already formed up with a couple of dozen officers, and I think we had about 188 or 200 enlisted men. And that's how we started the class. We graduated 34 enlisted men and 7 officers 26 weeks later.
And in your book, you go through in detail about the training and how difficult it was and the challenges and lessons you learned along the way. And one of the terms that came up that I hadn't seen much of was the KIT, the killed in training. It was a few years before I went to Ranger School that the 4 Rangers, the students died in swamp bays. And but this was back in the 60s. This was actually a fairly regular thing, KIT, killed in training.
Yes. We didn't lose anybody in my class during the actual BUDS training. But after we deployed, a lot of us would continue our physical exercising, running, swimming, jumping, etc. And sometimes men did die as a result of it. I lost a very good friend on a run named R.J. Coates. He was in my boat crew, and we were very close friends. He was a great athlete, tremendous runner, great. And we were on a run, and I knew that he was going to be a lot faster than me, so I took off about 10 minutes ahead of him. And my route took me down to the Navy Exchange in Subic Bay and back to the barracks. And so I didn't run back the same way I went. And I got dressed, went into town, saw some buddies in Subic Bay there having a beer. And the chief came up to us and said, R.J. Coates has died. They found his body on the side of the road. He apparently had a stroke. So those are the kinds of things that happen. We'd lose guys in helicopter drops. Well, a gentleman dropped. The pilot didn't compensate for the weight every time a man jumps out of a helicopter. Now, this is just jumping out of a helicopter, no parachute. That extra weight that that person represented is no longer there in the helicopter. Unless the pilot compensates, the helicopter will rise. And so you put 8 guys in a stick, and the 7th guy goes out, and by then you're another 50, 60 feet higher than the water, so you're maybe 100, 150 feet off the water. And a good friend of mine jumped out, and they'd found his body the next day. But he hit the water like he would hit cement from that altitude. So things like that happen, and it's a tragedy. But it didn't happen often. The UDT SEAL Memorial Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, has a special wall now for KIT, Navy SEALs and operators, in addition to the wall of those that have perished. So I fought very hard to get R.J. Coates' name on that memorial. It's a big marble memorial. So that's kind of where the KIT thing came in.
And we all know that training must be tough and realistic to train our warriors, but we have, I believe, over the years gotten better at implementing safety and the safety briefs for everything now, and we try to do our best to protect our warriors so that they can actually perform the function that we're paying them to do, which is to fight wars. But in the military, training isn't just something we do; it is what we do, and we do it every single day. And it's hard, it's tough, it's realistic, and it's dangerous.
Well, I think that that transcends all forms of all branches of the service. I mean, Marine Recon guys go through all kinds of training as well. Army Rangers and Green Beret guys, special ops people go through extensive training. And sometimes, we're going back to the subject of KIT, sometimes some of the instructors don't perhaps understand the physiology of that particular person, and they push a little bit over the line. We've had a couple of drownings during training in the last 10 or 15 years where, the instructors are telling these guys, you've got to swim 50 meters underwater, or you've got to do this with your hands tied behind your back and figure out a way to stay alive. And they get a little too aggressive maybe. There's been some disciplined officers as well as enlisted rank instructors because they went too far. And so that's something the military has to deal with. And it's unfortunate, but it happens.
And of course, the purpose to train us for war. So let's talk about, Let's transition now to you leave training, and shortly thereafter, you're in Vietnam.
Yeah, usually it's about a year after you go into your particular platoon. I think then the team management, if you will, the team officers and the other people are going to look to you to see how well they think you will perform in combat situation. They seldom wash out anybody. The only time I saw anybody getting washed out was because they were a thief. And they sent him home and busted him out. He wound up as a cook on a DDC destroyer.
And you also brought up that as you were going through UDT training and becoming a SEAL, that throughout the training process, there were people that quit, and it seemed like the Navy had a expedited system to get them away from the rest of the team. It's almost like we don't want the quitters to infect the people who are giving it their all. So tell us a little bit about that.
That's true. And I think there was even some stories going around that some men would actually join a class in order to get a new post. Because when they dropped you, you did have the option of going to one of half a dozen different locations for your next duty station. So the story was that some men would join and then quit, and then they would just disappear and they'd go back to where they wanted to go. They wanted to go back to Fort Pierce, they wanted to go back to Honolulu or whatever. On the other hand, a lot of them that quit were probably sorry that they quit and would like to come back. And in my time, the only time that a man could be recycled, if you will, was if he had an injury and they felt that he would still have a good chance of making it through the program. and a good friend of mine, David Devine, was in the class before mine, and he had that happen to him. He had had an accident. He broke some bones in his body, and he came back in my class and came through my class and did very well. He was killed in action in '68 in Vietnam. Left a wife
And
and
I'm
two.
sorry for your, I'm sorry for your loss, and we know how that unfortunately unfolds. And you went to Vietnam in what year?
My first trip to Vietnam was while I was deployed to Westpac in Underwater Demolition Team 11. And we went down. This is a funny story. We went down there on a destroyer, maybe an APD, a smaller than destroyer escort perhaps. And we swam 30 miles of beaches in hostile territory. So we had a small squad of Force Recon guys that set up a perimeter for us while we would recon 500 yards of beach at a time. So the cartography function was we draw a map of the beach every 500 yards. So we would deploy swimmers out with lead lines, and they would be taking small arms fire from the beach. And then the beach crew was also taking some fire. And when everything got settled down, then we would swim down the beach, maybe a row of 10 or 12 swimmers. You swim out to the 24-foot depth mark. And as you swim down every 25 yards, the crew on the beach would wave 2 flags, and you would take a sounding and write it on your slate, a little plastic slate with a pencil. And when everything was finished, you did maybe a mile of this stuff every 500 yards, the slates were turned into the cartography people, and they would actually make a map then of the ocean from 24 feet all the way up to the beach and then into the hinterland for another 100 meters or so. So the Marines helped us in doing those. So in the end of the day, you had a map that would be suitable for an amphibious invasion. That was the nature of the work. When I got back from that operation, I went to Okinawa, and we were doing some mine recovery operations with EOD divers. And we were working on a small gas turbine-powered boat, a wooden boat, because you couldn't have any steel around magnetic mines. They'll blow up. So we were diving using these wooden boats. And in the middle of the boat, there was the engine, and in the cowling, there were 2 red lines, and it said, "Danger zone" here. That was where the fans on the turbine engine were spinning at a high rate of speed. So we were out on the dive site, and these EOD guys were with us, and so we played rock, paper, scissors. We played a rock, paper, scissors game to see who got to go first in the water. And my buddy Bob Wilbur and I won that one. And while we were down 110 feet, we were using underwater pinging sonar to find the mine. The mine was about as big as a big 55-gallon oil drum. These weren't real mines, by the way. These were dummies that they had dropped, but the ignition system in it, they wanted to test, see if it would take the impact of falling into the water. So we would find the mine, and we had to be careful because there were sea snakes swimming around the bottom of the mine. They like to hide in these little crevices. So we put a buoy on the mine, and we swam back to the surface. And when we got to the surface, there was a big cloud of black smoke, and everybody was screaming. It turned out that the boat that we had just left, the turbine engine, the governor that controlled the RPM of the turbine, had failed, and the engine simply disintegrated, and it cut one of the EOD divers in half, the shrapnel from that engine. So he lived for 2 hours. We all said a prayer for him, but he was gone. So those are the kind of things that happen out in the field, even though you're basically just in a training mode.
So, and like you said, multiple tours in Vietnam. I remember a story of you, and just to backtrack, you met Lynn, the love of your life, right before you went to basic. And you thought this is someone I met, and this is probably going to be over. And she stayed with you the whole time. And at some point you decide, I'm done with my military career, and they bring you in the office. And they say, well, we're going to promote you to sergeant, and but you're going to do another tour. And you say, well, wait a minute, I don't want this. You should have promoted me a long time ago, and I'm out. But tell us about those experiences where You're obviously, it's a long distance relationship. For my generation, we had internet, we were able to call home. You have several of your letters actually in your book that are written back and forth between you and Lynn. So you made the long distance relationship work. We know that doesn't work often in the military. Often relationships fall apart when there's a lot of deployments, multiple deployments. But you went to Vietnam multiple times and were able to keep that relationship going. How did you make it work?
Well, I have to give most of the credit to Lynn. I mean, she stuck with me, and I even asked her before we got married if she would prefer, maybe that I should go over there and maybe not come back. And why do you want to get married before I go to Vietnam? And she said, no way. We're getting married in March. I deployed in June. And so we had 3 months together, and it was great. And she moved back in with her mom and waited by the mailbox every day for the letters, and I waited for the mail to be delivered to me. And I think we kept our relationship alive because we loved each other and wanted that to flourish. I think you may recall in my book I refer to my my little guardian angel, my little. It's kind of like your conscience. There's some things inside your head that sound right, and you reinforce that thinking about it. And I just had a voice in my head that said, "This is the woman for you." And I was still young. I was only 21 when I got married to Lynn. But it was the right thing, and it's still the right thing. Our kids are all grown, doing very well, successful. And we're struggling now through some of the things that happen to you when you get to be in your 80s.
Right, and fortunate to make it to that age. And in fact, I remember in the book, there's a point where I believe it was a halo jump, high altitude, low oxygen. You're jumping into Vietnam, and like most of us, you lose control of the chute. The chutes aren't that steerable, right? And we don't, and so you end up where you didn't want to be. And there's two Vietcong there who almost capture you, but you do something that, my dad has always told me. My father's also a Vietnam veteran. He said, always make sure you have money on you, because there could be some bad situations where you need money. And you had cash, and you had the currency that was called dong. And so tell us what happened when you landed. I believe it was in a rice paddy, crashed through some bamboo shoots, and all of a sudden there's a farmer and two Vietcong, and you think that that your wife is gonna get a telegram. And you're even right about that in your book, and you're really it seemed at the time your concern was getting back to your wife. So tell us the story about what happened.
Well, I was trying to get Halo jump qualified while I was in Vietnam, and unfortunately, we had a parachute rigger in the SEAL team who was a plank owner, as a matter of fact, named Carl Marriott, and we had our own parachute loft in Da Nang where we stayed. We stayed in an old French fort, by the way. It was a really neat place. It was built by the French for the French Foreign Legion officers as their bivouac. It was right on the beach in China Beach. And so we each had a private room. We had a room boy that came by and swept up all our cigarette butts and everything. It was kind of like the life of luxury, if you will, living on the beach like that. And we had a platform looking over the beach. We could have coffee or beer and stuff. And we had this parachute loft. And so one day I told Carl, I said, I'd like to get Halo qualified. I said, where can I get a chute? He said, well, let's go over to the Air Force Base, the Navy Air Force Base. And I traded a pair of fins or a knife or something with a pilot for his chute, because he could get another one. So I got a regular pull a D-ring chute, and Carl cut it the way you can make a steerable. So he made what they call a 7-gore TU. I don't know if you're familiar with parachute technology, but that makes it look. You cut 7 gores and you make the letter TU out of it. So there's 2 panels this way and then 5 panels this way, and that makes a fairly steerable parachute. But he cut it with scissors, and then he took it into town and had a Mamasan seamstress stitch a nice webbing around it so it didn't fray. And he showed me how to pack it. And once I learned how to do that, I made a couple of clear and pull jumps. You may be familiar with, you just bail it out and count to 10 and pull. You do those from, 3,000 or 4,000 feet. And then for me to make the final jump, I had to do a 12 or 12.5, whatever, which is a full 60-second fall. And I had my watch. I didn't have a nice little rig on top of my reserve. I just had my watch. So I bailed out of this, and the guy that took me up was a CIA guy from Air America, and he had a stolen aircraft called a Porter, It has a huge wing lift area, large wings, single turbine engine. And the CIA, these are the Air America guys, they would use those airplanes to fly leaflets, medical supplies, et cetera, into the mountains, into the highlands and stuff like that. That's a different story in a different book. As you'll hear. So anyway, so this, we just got this guy drunk one night and he took me up to let me jump. And we all knew that the terrain along the beach was fairly safe, except south of what was called Marble Mountain. This was actually a big hunk of marble that stuck up like Diamond Head, at the end of the beach, and that was VC tilt. So I pulled and I jumped and I pulled a little too high, so I got caught in some thermal drafts, updrafts, and instead of going down, I went back up again, and it drifted me down south towards Marble Mountain. Bad news, because I landed, like you said, in a bamboo grove. I thought I was going to get shish kebabbed. Crashed through the bamboo, covered up my face, landed, got a few scratches, sitting there in my harness swinging about 4 feet off the ground. And the farmer was pissed off. He was shaking his fist at me. And these two Vietcong guys, they didn't know who I was. I was, you may have heard the term MACV, SOG. That's the Military Air Assistance Command Studies and Observations Group. Well, I was working for the CIA in the Studies and Observation Group. We didn't have any dog tags. We had nothing on us that would tie us to the military at all. No insignia, nothing. I wore a bathing suit and a T-shirt, and I carried a 38 in the field and a little 22 that I bought personally when I went into town. And so I didn't look like an Army guy. They didn't know if I was a Russian or a Polak or whoever. And I spoke enough Vietnamese from the language school I went to, and all of us did. It took 8 weeks of Vietnamese language. And then I was able to convey to them I really was Dinky Dow, which means I'm crazy.
Which means crazy.
I'm crazy. Do I Dinky Dow? Do I Dinky Dow? Muy Dinky Dow. And I pulled out, very slowly pulled out my dong, and I handed them all the money. And I said, Sin Loy, I'm sorry. Dinky Dow, Sin Loy. And they smiled and took the money, and I walked out. And
wow.
A few days later, I don't know, it was a week or so later, some Army guys were there in a Jeep. They got ambushed, and one died, and 2 or 3 sent to Hanoi, POWs. So I thank God. My guardian angel was there. It was a divine intervention. Don't know if you believe in that, but I do. I've had 2 or 3 or 4 divine interventions where should have been my number, but it wasn't. You read one of them, the other one, with my blackout in the pool.
Yeah, and tell us about that.
Well, it was when I was in the underwater demolition team, before I went into the SEAL team. And I was in Subic Bay, and it was a 25, what I thought, yard pool. And I was used to showing off my swimming skills by swimming underwater 4 laps, 100 yards underwater, making a turn underwater and holding my breath. And I hyperventilated quite a bit, and I did 100 yards, 4 laps of the pool. And my buddy Roger Cook was watching me perform this idiotic stunt at the time. And I said, I know I can do 5 laps now, Roger. I know I can do 5 laps. Hyperventilated, went the 4th lap, made the turn for the 5th lap, lights out. Total out-of-body experience. Blackness, some stars, mellowness, a very clinical out-of-body experience for people that have had near-death experiences. And I felt myself lifting away, and I could actually look down and see Roger performing, resuscitating me. That was a very strange sight in my mind. And then I'm back in my body, looking up and saying, hey, Roger, what's going on? And he said I was down for about 8 minutes, 7 or 8 minutes, don't know for sure. So he rushed me to the hospital, and the doctors were absolutely shaking their heads. They said, how in the hell he recovered from this? I have no idea. You should be dead. He told the nurse, he says, if he's still breathing at 5 o'clock, let him go back to the barracks. And they discharged me at 5 o'clock, and I had a little headache, but that was about it. So, those are divine interventions. There's only one way to describe it. the man upstairs didn't want me to go, and Lynn was probably holding his hand saying, "Don't let him die."
And you had near death experiences, and you get out of the military. And for many of us, we think that once we get out, we're going to live a safe life, and that the adventure is over. But for you, the adventure was just beginning. So tell us a little bit about what you started doing once you got out of service. Once you were discharged from the Navy.
I wanted initially, my plan was to go back to school. I wanted to get a degree in physics or something engineering wise. But I met a good friend of mine who was in the class after mine, a guy named Jerry Linus, at the Hotel Del Coronado. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but it's a beautiful old
I have.
hotel. And
Beautiful.
he had just pulled up in a brand new Jag XKE with his girlfriend. And he was all dressed to the T's. And I said, "Jerry, good seeing you, man," because he got out about maybe 5-6 months before I did. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm down in Louisiana diving." He said, "You wouldn't believe it. You got to get in the business, man." He said, "They're paying huge, big bucks." I paid cash for my Jag. And he said, "By the way," he said, "they're starting to hire divers for the North Sea. They're trying to drill oil in the North Sea." This was in 1966. So I made a mental decision and then a physical decision to do it. And I made contact with several diving companies, and I got a call from one up in Santa Barbara named Ocean Systems. They'd been around as a contract diving service for Union Oil Company, mostly on the west coast of California. And they needed divers to go into Stavanger, Norway, and work in the North Sea. So the president of the company, a guy named Danny Wilson, he hired me. I spent 2 months in Santa Barbara. Lynn was with me and our little daughter, first daughter. And then I deployed to Stavanger, Norway as part of the crew. And we were diving surface supplied air like scuba, surface supplied air with a hose down to about 150 feet. Mixed gas bell diving was the traditional way of diving deep with mixed gas. But if the bell wasn't available, we also had to be qualified in hard hat mixed gas diving. So, and qualified to 500 feet. So that was my job. And immediately I was getting more money than I ever dreamed of. I was making more money than an engineer out of Stanford. So this was for me. And I had an affinity for water. I was not afraid of the water, even though it was as black as can be. And I excelled at that. Within 6 months, I was a diving supervisor and ran my own crew. So that's how I got into the diving business. And you've read some of the adventures that I've had in that business. A couple of near-death experiences were not mine personally necessarily, but others that were divers, and where I was just playing a role to help them survive. It was an exciting career. It's the biggest adrenaline rush you can ever imagine, standing on the bottom of the ocean in the middle of the North Sea where nobody's been before. It's kind of like I'm sure the astronauts felt when they were walking on the moon. So you're tied to the world through this rubber hose. Without that rubber hose, you're dead man, just like that. And you got to watch out.
And so you
got to keep an eye on your hose.
And so you leave the military to spend more time with Lynn and to live what you think is going to be a normal life, but yet you find yourself still traveling quite a bit and still living a life of danger and excitement. And so that, I think that the misconception is when we leave the military, that excitement and danger is over. But the reality is there are plenty of careers out there like yours where you can continue to pursue it.
Oh, sure. I mean, even being a police officer, a highway patrolman, or a firefighter, EMT guys, I mean, they get their adrenaline rush. And basically, I guess I have to admit I was an adrenaline junkie. I got my thrill to doing that kind of stuff and showing off, being a little macho about it. The commercial diving world is filled with the same kind of characters as SEALs, same kind of people. Many of the guys in the commercial diving business were Navy SEALs. And I had several buddies of mine that went commercial diving, and my buddy George Layton, who was in my boat crew with me, he spent 30 days in a tank in the middle of the North Sea. It's saturation diving, where you go 30 days in a tank, and every day you go down from the tank, you go down deeper to do work, and then you come back to the tank. Tank keeps your body compressed to roughly 400 feet, but you make excursions to 500 feet. And you do this for 3 or 4 weeks. And when you get out, they give you a check for $15,000 or $20,000. This is 1966. So everybody that did it, had a fancy car and a fancy girlfriend. I was a little more modest, I guess, because I had a family and a wife and another daughter. So that's how it worked.
My generation would leave service and then come back as a contractor to Iraq or Afghanistan and make a lot more money and a little bit more relaxed rules and seem to really enjoy that. That didn't solve the being away from the family problem, but it gave them a chance to develop a different skill set or to use the same skill set in a different way.
Yes, and a lot of SEALs have done that too since that whole evolution has happened. My generation, not so much because we were too old, too fat by the time that got ready. But your generation had a lot of guys coming out of the Army, Marines, and SEALs go over to Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, or whatever and become contractors. I had my buddy George went over to Afghanistan. In fact, he made a movie. He's like to smoke marijuana, and I'm not into that kind of stuff. But he went over there to do a movie about the heroin business, and it's called Fishing in Afghanistan. It's actually a short little video. It's on YouTube called Fishing in Afghanistan. And he starts out by showing these kids. By the way, he's over there as a contractor to help put in some water lines, fresh water lines for some of the extended villages that lost their water for whatever reason. So he's working as a contractor. And he wore I think he carried a 45. But he's out in the bush. He's dressed just like an Afghan. He's got a big full beard and everything. And you've seen the guys, even guys out of the Army and stuff. They try to blend in as much as possible. And George did that. And he made this movie showing little 6, 7, 8-year-old kids in the poppy field scraping poppy paste off the poppies. And then how does it get refined? And he actually got a chance through his interpreter to go into a processing building, which is just a mud shack there somewhere in the Hindu Kush, where they were actually refining the heroin poppy paste. And he got in because his interpreter told the guard, who had an AK-47, and all this is on film, that George was a deaf mute from Turkey. He said, he's a deaf mute from Turkey. So they let him in, and George has got a little handy cam working. And he got footage of inside this place, stirring the mud and all that stuff they were doing. And later on, after he got out of that place, a DEA agent, international guy, asked him, he said, how in the heck did you know where to go? He said, we've been trying to track these guys down for years. He said, it's very simple. He says, they only have one hot meal a day. And so if you see smoke coming out of the chimney at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning, they're cooking paste. They're not cooking food. And the DEA agent said, I didn't know that. Terrific. It was a great hint. So, yeah, I really had no desire to go back into combat. I think that I got my adrenaline rush from the diving. I didn't need any more bullets shooting at me to make it even worse.
And you found that adrenaline another way as well. And you got involved with lasers and became an entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the diving business started to take a toll on my relationship. And I could tell that Lynn was taking care of 3 kids, and I'm gone to wherever. They never find oil in Hawaii. They always find it in sort of the crazy places, Borneo and South Island of New Zealand and in Australia. So all this traveling I was doing, I knew was taking a toll on our relationship. And I just felt that it was time to hang that up and find something else. Now my last job was vice president of a large diving company based in Singapore. And I was covering everything from the Philippines on the north to the South Island of New Zealand on the south, New Guinea, all the islands of Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. I had a huge territory. I had 600 divers working for me. And we built a house in Florida, a beautiful house in a lake community with a big, beautiful spring in the middle, called the Springs, as a matter of fact, near Orlando. And that was our plan. When I got through with the diving business, we would move back to that house. So I decided to call it a day and go find another career. And that's basically what I did. Moved back to Florida, started thinking about what I wanted to do, had a couple of false starts, took about 1.5 years. And I got a call one day from a recruiter who wanted to know if I would be interested in interviewing with a laser company for a sales job, because I had been in sales as well. I said, sure, I'll interview. This is a startup group. Guys came out of Martin Marietta, a few engineers, sharp guys, and they'd been involved in some of the first laser target designated systems that the military used, smart weapons. So that was kind of on the cusp of the smart weapons business. So I got the job, and a year later, I put up $5 million on the books, backlog sales, and we got a couple of calls from some New York stock exchange firms, boutique firms, to do an IPO, take the company public. And I walked away with 45,000 shares of stock that later I sold. And that's how I got in the laser business.
And how long were you in that business? Or is that where you retired from there?
27 years. I spent
27 years
in the laser business. Yeah. So I went from one company to another. I had three or four different laser companies during that 27-year period. The last one was a company here in California that was eventually bought out by Amada, which is one of the largest Japanese laser companies in the world. They make those huge laser platforms that, 20 feet square, that XY table, robotic, cut 2-inch steel. They use them in the shipbuilding industry in Japan. And that company bought my company out. Anyway, I had enough resources to retire, so I took a retirement. I quit when I was 62, and then I started writing my books. I did some painting too. I sold my paintings at the local winery. I had a lot of fun doing that. Sold a lot of paintings to to the drunks. They came out after having a party at the winery. They went, oh, I like that painting. Yeah, buy that. So.
Well, and your writing is not just your autobiography, No Lifeguard on Duty, which I have right here. You're a talented writer because this is an autobiography, but you've also written science fiction, you've written poetry, you've written quite a few things. But what I liked about we talked about this right before the podcast is that to write this book, what you did was you had been writing all along. And I think that's the key, is that putting this book together was not starting from scratch. It was years and years of compilations of your writing that you were able to put together. You said, I think I'm going to write a book. It's never as easy as we think. It's just like everything else in life. But you have shown a lot of I think breadth of talent in writing, and it seems to be something that you really enjoy doing, and you continue to do in your retirement, and you're continuing to write today.
Well, I wrote a lot of technical articles when I was in the laser business, advances and things like applications, engineering kind of stuff. So I had a lot of things published in trade publications. Anything to do with lasers would publish my work. And I describe a particular application, how it went about, and what kind of a laser you use, how big the beam should be, how much power it should use, what kind of fixture you need. And when we first started out, the last company I was with for 12 years. They didn't have a laser group. They were bought out by a Japanese company that had a couple of lasers. And they said, the Japanese told my company, they said, you have to sell our lasers. So they hired me as their sales manager to get that whole project off the ground. And they only had one type of laser. It's called a YAG laser. It's a solid state laser. And they had two power supplies, one 10 watt and one 50 watt. But it was just an engine. And in my view, you can't make anything with just an engine. You have to build a car around it, or a truck around it, or a wagon around it. You have to build something you want to do or go somewhere. So I insisted and kept pushing engineering to drive them into making a workstation, X, Y, Z, robotics, rotary tables, that sort of thing, so that you could mount the laser over that, and a person could take a widget and place it in a fixture and have the thing spin, and the laser beam would do its business. So you had a complete system, and then you go out in the field and sell a $200,000, $300,000 system instead of a $50,000 laser that they didn't really know what to do with it because it didn't have any motion to it. It was just a beam of light coming out, shoot. So that was a big transition that I was able to get the company to do, to make them into a systems integrator rather than just a laser supplier. Because Ford makes cars and trucks. And if you just have an engine, what good is it? The engine's no good unless it's sitting on four wheels, all right? So that was the attitude. And so I got them into the systems business. And within 5 years, we had a $20 million company.
You found a problem, and then you provided the solution, and you found that the solution was many times more valuable than the product that was on the market.
Yeah. We sold system. I sold systems to companies that wanted to manufacture some of the very first what they call EDFs. EDFAs. These are transmitters and amplifiers that are used in the fiber optic communication industry, and they have to seal them and they have to do all kinds of things with them. It takes very, very delicate work to do. And I made some of the first systems in one company. Bought 10 systems at $300,000 a piece. Shipped them to
Wow.
China. Anyway, that's how I got in the laser business, and I had a great career with the laser business. I met some great people. That whole industry has just absolutely exploded. Even since I've retired, I retired the day after I turned 62. I said I'm gone. I wanted to retire, and I had the resources to do that. So, but the guys I worked with went on and did great things with other companies as well.
And through all this, Lynn has stayed with you. You've been married now for 59 years. Is that correct?
It'll be 59 years on March 5th of next year. And God willing, we'll push 50 years and more.
Your life is an amazing story, Craig. And I want to now take our veterans to what I call the after action review. You probably remember these from the military. And what I like is the 3 up, 3 down, 3 examples of leadership that helped you get to where you were, whether it's civilian leadership, business leadership, military leadership. Some 3 great examples and 3 bad examples.
I'm an honest person. I don't like to bullshit. If I say this can do that, it can do that. I'm also a patriot. Being in the service, I was a Canadian. I didn't have to join the Navy. I have a Canadian passport. I have dual citizenship. One of the things that really bothered me was we had a customer in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley. It was a Chinese company, and they had a row of about 10 or 15 women who I later learned had been imported from China, and they were using our laser. I had 15 laser systems, small ones, but they weren't using any optical protection. And when I had a call from the manager, owner, operator, whatever, one of the lasers wasn't working right. He wanted me to come down and fix it. I said, well, I'm not the fix-it guy, but I'll come down and take a look. So I got up to the facility, and he's got all these women that don't speak English. He's got the equal opportunity employment sign on his wall that you have to have by law, but there's nobody in there that speaks English except him and one other engineer. I said, where's your safety manual? I don't know. What safety manual? I said, everybody has to have a safety manual according to the FDA. Didn't have it. I said, what are you doing with these women? They don't have any eye protection. Oh, no understand. He played his cards like he was dumb, didn't understand the laws, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, I'm sorry, I have to report you. And I found out 2 weeks later they moved the whole operation back to China. But none of the women were wearing eye protection whatsoever. So I kind of got on his case for doing that. People found out about that, about what I had done, and I think I was doing the right thing. I was proud the day I retired, and the company gave me a nice going away party and a trophy for being the millionaire salesman or whatever. I don't know. The trophy is sitting in my closet. It's a trophy. The darn thing's heavy.
Well, awarding our team members is important, right? Because at the end of the day, it may not be about the trophy, but it's about recognizing you in front of the team and letting the team know that you've done something great, because we lead by example. And when the team sees an example of leadership, they're more likely to follow it. So tell us a little bit, if you could, a positive about military leadership that you saw when you were in service.
Well, I think the communication between the officers and the enlisted men in the SEAL teams is quite different from the regular Marines, the regular Navy. There's a much closer bond because the officers are going through the training the same as you, and so I think that the enlisted men learn from the officers how to lead, as much as perhaps the officers learn how to lead. And I think that was really important. Some of my best friends were the officers in my class, And there were 7 officers that graduated. And my boat skipper, Brooks Reitnauer, was the oldest and most senior officer. He was a JG lieutenant. He was the nicest, most calm, straightforward guy, but he knew his business. He knew how to lead, and we never got into trouble. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. I went to his funeral. But the other 6 officers that graduated are still alive, and every 5 years or so, the officers will get together and host a party and say, "Come on over." They buy the beer, they buy the wine, they buy the dinner and everything. And so it's a totally different sense of camaraderie when the officers and the enlisted men have that much connectivity, if you will, friendship, loyalty to each other. So I think you learn from that. I know people that came out of the Marines or the Army, and they hated their officers, and even the NCOs. Some of the senior NCOs, they hated them. They were horrible people. They weren't smart. They just happened to have the stripes. I'm sure everybody's got stories to tell about that. That anybody who's been in the military will tell you, and you probably experienced it too. Some are good, some are bad. We've had some bad eggs in the SEAL team over the years. My friend David Devine got killed because of an officer that told him he had to get in the water, upriver. And the water was 8 feet deep, and he's carrying 60 pounds of gear. He went to the bottom, and he never came up. The officer got reprimanded, and he kicked him out of the teams, but it didn't bring Dave Devine back.
Leadership matters.
Bad leadership. Another officer that I know personally ordered a friend of mine and his dive partner to get in the water off the Straits of Taiwan to do a closed circuit oxygen dive. Now, oxygen diving is dangerous because oxygen as a gas, pure oxygen, will kill you at 60 feet. Like that. And if you go below 60 feet, you're really asking for trouble. So the Navy has a law that says you don't go deeper than 30 feet. Well, when you're launching divers and the seas are 15 or 20 feet, you know that divers could be at 40 feet, think they're safe, and a 30-foot waves come along or a swell. And all of a sudden they're at 60 feet. My good buddy, one of my boat crew, died. Tony Escotter. Had a wife, one or two kids from Los Gatos, California. So just mistakes, officers maybe being trying to make marks for themselves or get praise. But, there's always going to be 1 or 2 bad eggs in the batch.
And we've seen it, the careerist who cares more about their position than they do about their people. And that always ends badly.
Nobody's hind end. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you see that in the enlisted ranks too, in the senior enlisted ranks. A good friend of mine was in my class. He was really the only bad boy we had in the class. He had a criminal record. Army wouldn't take him in. Marines wouldn't take him. Navy said, "Come back in a year, and if you haven't had any altercations with the cops in a year, I'll take you in." So he came in the Navy. He was a yeoman. You wouldn't think a bad boy would be a yeoman. You think a bad boy would be a gunner's mate or something like that. He was a yeoman, and he was a great yeoman. And he made rank, and he was finally worked his way up. I think he made 4 tours to Vietnam. Several Purple Hearts. Some of them he didn't even want. He said, "Keep it. I got enough." And highly decorated. Got a warrant commission. You may recall a person named Dick Marcinko. He's written several books. SEAL Team
Yes.
2. Well, Dick Marcinko asked my friend, my classmate, to come to the East Coast, and he would get him to the War College. So he transferred to the East Coast. Marcinko got him to the War College. He got 2 master's degrees and a commission. They commissioned him as a light lieutenant. They didn't make him an ensign. They got him right to JG right away. And he retired after 30 some odd years as the Bullfrog, the oldest active duty Navy SEAL. That's the Bullfrog. He retired as a full commander.
Wow.
So there's some great success stories. I'm proud to say.
And I think as leaders, our goal is to develop all of our team members to grow to that level, right? To be that
Absolutely.
senior leader.
I felt so good when the guys that worked for me went on after I retired. They left. They went on to new jobs and made much more money and had much more success and got much more recognition for their hard work. So I really felt good about that. I felt good about the guys that worked for me had gone on and done things as good as I had ever done.
Sometimes those dividends of leadership we don't see for years down the road, but they usually happen after we're no longer the leader. But it still makes us feel good to know that we played a role in that development.
And I look back on my swimming career when you're standing on the podium and you're getting a medal. To me, that was a nice reward. But I always was thinking, where's the next one? Where's the next one? I wanted to move up the ladder, so to speak. So I was just as devastated by that event early in my life as my family was.
We want something greater. And that's most people that serve in the military feel that, just like you want the next medal. You had the win. Where's the next win and the next one and the next one? And that seems to be common among leaders that excel, but also among service members. They just don't want the next promotion, They want the next mission. They want to succeed in the next mission.
Yes.
The next challenge.
Yeah. A good friend of mine who was a plank owner of SEAL Team 1, a guy named Dennis McCormick, he's passed away now. But after he got out of the Navy, he got a PhD in clinical psychology. And he wrote a paper called the seven characteristics of Navy SEALs. And he went on to explain it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a Navy SEAL to have it. You could be an Army Green Beret, you can be a firefighter, you can be a police officer, but these are characteristics of leadership. And resilience was clearly the number one thing. Resilience, determination, calm and an innovative approach to problem solving, decisive action, and then execute a plan. People that enjoy being with other people, a lot of intercommunication, interconnectivity to the rest of the world and society, honesty beyond reproach, a belief in a higher power, belief in God, self-control. I have to admit that sometimes we all lose our self-control, one too many beers, whatever, you get tempered up. But I have an optimistic outlook on life. I just turned 80 years old. I've got my lumbar back problems, but I have to thank one person very, very much, and she works for you, Stephanie Bennett, and her assistant, Melissa. Those two gals made my life so much easier, and they are just to be rewarded and congratulated. I can't praise them enough. So thank you for hiring them and leading them, and thank Stephanie personally from my heart, and Melissa. And you know what I'm talking about.
I do. And of course, Stephanie is an Air Force veteran. And so we hire veterans because they understand leadership the way you do. And I want to thank you, Craig Marley, for being on the Veteran-Led podcast, for everything that you have done as a leader. You've led by example, but more importantly, you have lived by example. From overcoming adversity early on, to becoming a Navy SEAL, serving in Vietnam, coming out and having a great like I said, we're all adrenaline junkies at heart, and but continuing that great career, and then when the family began to suffer because of your career, you went into lasers, became an entrepreneur, and now you're an author. You continue to just do more and more and keep building a bigger future, and that's an important example for veterans. We know too many veterans that leave service and life ends there for them. They don't do anything else, and they're miserable. But you showed that the adventure can continue, and the gifts that you can get, the leadership gifts that you received in the military, you have given back both as a diver, as an entrepreneur in the world of lasers, and now as an author. So thank you for being on the Veteran-Led podcast, and most importantly, thank you for your service to our great nation. Thank you for joining us today on Veteran Led, where we pursue our mission of promoting veteran leadership in business, strengthening the veteran community, and getting veterans all of the benefits that they earn. If you know a leader who should be on the Veteran Led podcast, report to our online community by searching @Veteran Led on your favorite social channels and posting in the comments. We want to hear how your military challenges prepared you to lead your industry or community, and we will let the world know. And of course, hit subscribe and join me next time on Veteran Led.